A woman handed back a Christmas tree in the middle of January with the tinsel still wrapped around the branches, and the refund took 3 minutes. Nobody argued because nobody had to. That is not a loophole in the rules. That is the rules. Here is how a return counter actually works, and who quietly pays for every yes. Somewhere around the middle of January, at a Walmart in a part of the country where the parking lot still had gray snow banked up against the cart corrals, a woman rolled up to the service desk with a 7.5-foot artificial Christmas tree in her cart. Not in a box, exactly. In a box that had been taped shut by somebody who had clearly lost a physical fight with it. The flaps didn't line up. A whole section of branches was poking out the top like a hand reaching for help. The associate had to pull that section out, because checking condition is part of the job. And there it was. A strand of silver tinsel wrapped around the middle, 4 inches of it, the kind that ends up in your vacuum in August. A bent limb, where somebody had crammed the thing back in at an angle it was never designed to bend. And the smell. Anybody who has worked a return counter knows the smell I mean. Cinnamon candle, dog, carpet, somebody's kitchen. That tree had lived in a house. That tree had held ornaments. There are almost certainly children in that family with a photograph taken standing in front of it. The customer's explanation was 4 words long. It didn't work out. If you've ever stood in that line, you know exactly what you expect to happen next. You expect a manager. You expect a conversation. You expect at minimum a raised eyebrow, some small acknowledgement from the universe that a used Christmas tree is being handed back after Christmas by a person with a completely straight face. What actually happened was that the associate scanned the receipt, the register asked her 2 questions, she answered both, and the refund went back to the customer's card. The whole thing took under 3 minutes. The tree went on a flatbed cart and rolled to the back. And here's the part that reframes the entire story, the part that almost nobody standing in that line knows. On the calendar, that return was completely routine. Walmart's own published policy says that most things bought from the 1st of October through the end of December can come back until the end of January. That's the holiday window, printed publicly, available to anyone who scrolls. December 18th to January 15th isn't a loophole. It's Tuesday. So the date was never the absurd part. The absurd part was the tinsel. And the register does not have a field for tinsel. Somebody standing there in a vest with a name tag on it made a decision about the tinsel in about 1.5 seconds, and that decision is the actual subject of this video. The woman who took that tree back was not the person who decided anything. That's the first thing to understand about this whole machine, and it's the thing customers get wrong most often, usually while pointing a finger at somebody making a modest hourly wage. A modern return terminal splits the transaction into 2 piles. Pile 1 is everything a computer can settle by itself. Is this item ours? Was it bought within the window? Does the receipt match? Does the card match? Is this a category with its own shorter clock? Because plenty of them are. Consumer electronics run on 30 days at Walmart, not 90. Phones with service on them are down at 14. The machine handles all of that faster than you can get your keys out of your pocket. Pile 2 is everything a computer cannot see. Is it opened? Is it used? Is it filthy? Is there a strand of tinsel in it that tells a whole story about a family's December? That pile lands on a human being, and that human being has a line of 11 people behind her, 3 of whom have already sighed loud enough to be heard from the pharmacy. The register asks her for a reason code. Understand what a reason code actually is, because it is not for you and it is not a judgment about you. It's a routing instruction. It tells the system whether this item goes back to a shelf, goes into a claims pile, or goes straight into a compactor. It's inventory plumbing, wearing the costume of an opinion. And past certain conditions, the terminal locks and asks for a manager's approval, which sounds like a safeguard and functions in practice like a tax. Getting a manager to the desk on a Saturday afternoon means a call over the radio, a wait, a walk, an explanation, and a manager who now has 1 fewer minute for the 11 other things pulling at him. Every person in that chain knows which action requires the fewest steps, and it is never the one where somebody argues. So, when people say Walmart has a generous return policy, they're describing an outcome and crediting it to a personality trait. Nobody at that company woke up feeling generous. The friction was designed out of the front end deliberately, one prompt and one permission at a time, by people solving for volume. You are not arguing with a policy. You are standing inside a permission structure, and the person facing you is at the very bottom of it. 40 pounds of dog food, opened, rolled down at the top and clipped with a chip clip that belonged to somebody's kitchen. Maybe a third of it gone, which if you've ever hauled one of those bags to a car, you understand is still a serious amount of dog food to be sliding across a customer service counter. The reason given: my dog won't eat it. Approved. Refund. Have a good one. The dog, meanwhile, is at home eating a sock with tremendous enthusiasm, having formed no opinion whatsoever about the protein content of anything. Now here's what happens to that bag, because this is where people's mental model breaks. It does not go back to the shelf. It cannot go back to the shelf. There is no version of the world where an opened bag of kibble with a stranger's chip clip on it gets resold. And any employee who tried would be creating a much bigger problem than a refund. It gets scanned with a reason code, and it gets destroyed. The full retail value of that bag evaporated the second it crossed the threshold. The woman walked out of there believing she had won something. And this is the part I find quietly funny. Nobody argued with her. There was no contest. She showed up braced for a fight that the system had already decided, years before she was born as a customer, was not worth having. Behind her, in line, for what it's worth, was a man with a car seat, still assembled. A Cheerio wedged in the crevice by the buckle. He got his money too. So somebody paid for that bag of dog food and that Cheerio-adjacent car seat. Money doesn't evaporate just because merchandise does. The question is who, and the answer is almost never the person the customer imagines. Before that bag ever reaches the compactor, the money behind it has already moved, and it moved along paths that were negotiated long before anybody's dog turned up his nose. Ask 100 people who eats the cost of a return, and you'll get two answers. Half say Walmart eats it. The other half say we all eat it, in prices, which is the answer people give when they want to sound like an economist. Both are partly true, and both miss the mechanism. In the agreements between enormous retailers and the companies that supply them, damaged and returned goods generally are not litigated one item at a time. Nobody is placing a phone call to a pet food company about a single bag. Those losses get handled by an allowance agreed to up front, a percentage baked into the deal before the product ever ships to a store. The supplier knows a certain slice of what it sells is coming back or getting thrown away, prices that in, and moves on. That's why the associate at the counter has no financial stake in fighting you about a bag of kibble. The fight was settled in advance, in a conference room in Bentonville, Arkansas, by people who have never met you and never will. Whatever survives in resellable shape has its own afterlife. Truckloads of customer returns get sold at auction to liquidators, and there is an entire cottage industry of people who buy pallets of other people's regret, sort them on a garage floor, and resell them online. Your returned air fryer has a second career. Congratulations to it. So what actually lands on the store? Not the merchandise cost, mostly. What lands on the store is labor. Minutes at the desk. The flatbed cart. The person in the back who has to sort, scan, tag, and stage all of it. Space in a stockroom that is already too small. Numbers on a report that a district manager will ask about, in a tone, on a Monday. And what lands on the associate? Financially, nothing. She isn't docked for your tree. That's not the point. What lands on her is every other part of it. The line getting longer while she pulls tinsel out of a branch. The next customer who saw the tree go through and now believes the counter is a suggestion. The metric on how long her transactions take, which does not have a column for the sentence a woman said to her at the desk. That's the trade the whole system makes. It converts a merchandise problem into a labor problem. and then it hands the labor problem to whoever is standing there. When people call the policy generous, that's the part they're accidentally praising. The generosity is real. It just isn't the company's to give. A man came in with a receipt sealed inside a sandwich bag. Not folded in a wallet. Preserved. The way you'd keep a document that might matter someday, which tells you everything about how he approached this. Pressure washer. Bought 4 years earlier. Still had the box, which is its own kind of achievement, because who has the box after 4 years and where exactly are they keeping it? He wasn't angry. That's the detail that mattered more than anything else that happened. He explained the problem, laid the receipt on the counter, and waited like a man at a government office who has read the sign and brought all 4 documents. The window on that had closed roughly 3.5 years earlier. The associate told him so, correctly and politely. He didn't escalate. He said something like, "Well, I figured it was worth asking." A manager came over, and the manager gave him a store card for a portion of it. Not because of policy. Policy had left the building years back. It happened because store leadership at most chains carries some room to make an exception, an informal budget for smoothing things over. And because this man had spent real money at that store for years, and the register could see it, and because he was easy to categorize. Calm, documented, reasonable, gone in 6 minutes. Which brings up the thing that irritates me about the folklore around this. Everybody believes screaming works. Everybody has an uncle who insists the trick is to make a scene until they cave. And sometimes it does work, which is exactly why the belief survives. But watch what actually happened here. Nobody escalated. The manager exercised discretion he already had on a customer who made the decision easy, and it cost the store a fraction of what a 20-minute standoff would have cost. Discretion is real. It is also invisible, unadvertised, and impossible to demand, because the moment you demand it, you've made yourself expensive, and expensive customers get handled by the rule book rather than by the human. The rule book is where mercy goes to die. But that raises the obvious follow-up. If saying no is what the rulebook is for, why does anybody ever hesitate to use it? Why is no the hard word at a counter whose entire purpose is deciding when to say it? When the desk turns somebody down, a clock starts, and it is not the customer's clock. It's the store's, and it runs faster than most shoppers would believe. Here's the arithmetic nobody does out loud. A disputed return that goes badly takes 15 minutes at the counter. It pulls a manager off the floor for another 10. It stalls a line of 9 people, some of whom now abandon carts, which is a real cost with a real name in retail. Then it produces a phone call to an 800 number, and in most large chains, a corporate complaint does not disappear into corporate. It comes back down. It arrives at the store as a task, on the desk of a manager who now has to explain in writing why an employee correctly enforced a rule. Add it up and you can burn more value than the item was worth before anyone even opens the box. There's also a wrinkle that didn't exist 20 years ago. Walmart publishes its return policy openly on its own corporate site, which means the man at that counter very often has it pulled up on his phone while the associate is explaining the part he skipped. He isn't arguing from memory. He's arguing from a document out loud, and a document changes the temperature of an argument in a way nothing else does. That's the engine underneath every impossible return in this video. Not kindness, not weakness. Throughput. The system is optimized to move human beings past that counter and out the door, and everything that slows the line down gets priced accordingly. Which produces a result I want you to sit with, because I think it's the genuinely uncomfortable part. The customers who never abuse anything are subsidizing the ones who do. Not much per person. A few cents here, a slightly higher price there, a longer wait in line behind a woman with a tree. And the person absorbing the largest share of it isn't a shareholder. It's a worker whose job quietly includes being the surface all of this lands on. The customer is always right was a department store slogan from more than 100 years ago, invented to advertise a store's confidence, not to describe reality. It was marketing. It escaped, it bred, and now it lives at service counters as a kind of folklore that only ever gets cited by the person holding the item. The car battery is the one that looks like the worst offender on the list and is actually the cleanest transaction of the day. Picture what shows up: corroded terminals with that blue-green crust, a case scuffed down to the plastic, road grime baked on, and it's leaking a little bit of something the guy is very casual about. No box, no receipt, no bag. He carried it in against his shirt, which he is going to regret in about an hour. He wants a new one. And they take it. Of course they take it, because a dead lead-acid battery is not garbage, it's inventory. When you buy a car battery, you pay a core charge on top of the price, and you get that money back when you bring the old battery in. That's not a fee somebody invented to annoy you. Lead is genuinely valuable. The recycling stream for these things is one of the most efficient in the entire economy, and the retailer wants that corroded brick in the back of somebody's trunk badly enough to hold your money hostage until you produce it. So the crustiest, ugliest, most disrespectful-looking item at that counter is the one item on this list where the store is arguably ahead. He brought back a commodity. He also brought back proof of purchase without knowing it, because battery replacements can usually be looked up, and the free replacement period is a defined warranty term, not a mood. I bring this up because it complicates the story the internet likes to tell about returns, where every customer at the desk is a leech and every yes is a defeat. Sometimes the person who looks like a scammer is executing a program the manufacturer set up and paid for on purpose. Sometimes the guy with the receipt in the sandwich bag is the one asking for something the store owes him nothing for. Appearances at a service counter are worthless. What matters is what's actually attached to the item, and the customer almost never knows what that is. Neither, honestly, does the customer with the receipt, which is worth pausing on because the receipt is the single most fought-over object in this entire building, and I don't think one shopper in 50 knows what it really does. For all the noise a receipt generates in these arguments, the job it's doing is much narrower than people think. It is not a permission slip. It is not evidence in a trial. It's a routing document, and half the time the store doesn't need the paper at all, because the transaction is already sitting in a database with your card number attached to it. Pay with plastic, and there's a lookup. Use the app and the receipt is on your phone whether you remember saving it or not. That long transaction number at the bottom of the paper exists to pull one specific purchase out of billions, which is the entire trick. So what happens when you genuinely don't have one? Not mercy. A different set of rails entirely. Walmart's own help pages spell it out for anyone who cares to look. No receipt means a valid government-issued photo identification, and your information gets verified against what they describe as a secure database. Read that phrase again because it's doing a lot of work. There is a record. It follows you between visits. The friendly person at the counter may have no idea what your history looks like, but the system does, and it has an opinion before she does. Then your options narrow. Exchange it, take a gift card, or go through the manufacturer for a repair. What you don't get is cash back into your hand. That isn't pettiness, and it isn't about you. It's about the oldest arithmetic in retail crime. If a stranger can walk merchandise out the front door and walk it back in through the return line for folding money, you have not built a store. You have built an ATM with a garden center. A gift card breaks that. It keeps the value inside the building, it's traceable, and it's a miserable instrument to convert into cash at scale. Every no-receipt rule you've ever resented was written with a shoplifter in mind, and you're just standing in his shadow. Here's the wrinkle that makes it almost funny. The gift card lands within about 3 hours by Walmart's own published timeline. A refund to your credit or debit card can take up to 10 business days. So the option that feels like a penalty is frequently the fastest money in the room, which is exactly why people take it while still muttering about the principle of the thing on the way to the parking lot. What I want you to take from this layer is a shift in where you point your frustration. When someone gets turned down at that counter, the honest customer's instinct is to blame the associate, because she's the only human in the transaction, and humans are the only things we know how to be angry at. But she didn't build the database. She didn't set the window. She isn't the reason your word alone isn't good enough. She is the last person in a very long chain, and the only one in it who has to look you in the eye. There is one category left that we haven't touched. The item comes back in the right box, on time, with the receipt, and the whole thing is still a complete fiction. If you want to find the exact place where this whole machine goes blind, look at a box that's still sealed. 11 days after buying a game console, a guy in his 20s was back at that desk with it. 11 days is comfortably inside the 30-day electronics window. Receipt pulled up on his phone. The box was in genuinely beautiful shape. Flaps intact. The factory tape still looking like factory tape. None of that shredded cardboard you get from somebody who opens things with their hands like an animal. He said it wasn't what he needed. He didn't elaborate, and nobody asked him to. The associate did the things she was trained to do and a couple she'd trained herself to do. Model number on the label against the model number on the receipt. Serial sticker present and unpeeled. Then she picked it up, because after 2 years at that desk, your hands know what a console weighs, and the weight was right. Everything checked out. Refund to the card. 4 days later, at a return processing facility a few hundred miles away, somebody with a box cutter opened it. Inside was the same model console, not the one he'd bought. His. 4 years old, one port that stopped working sometime last spring, and a faded sticker on the side that a child had applied at some point with real commitment. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a plan, carried out by a man who understood the system better than most of the people employed inside it. He knew the counter checks the outside of a box, because the counter is where boxes stay closed. Same store, different month. A car audio unit came back in its box at the correct weight, and the weight was correct because it had been packed with a bag of aquarium gravel and a folded hand towel to stop the rattle. Approved as well. Nobody opened that one either. And the obvious reaction is, well, open the box. Every retail worker watching this just laughed because they know exactly how that plays out. You cut the tape on a customer's word, and now the merchandise is opened merchandise, which changes what it's worth and where it can go. You've also just told a stranger out loud, in front of everybody waiting behind him, that you think he's lying. If you're right, you've gained one console. If you're wrong, you've humiliated a person who did nothing, and he will be on the phone before he reaches his car, and the sentence he uses will be that he was accused. Nobody at that counter was ever going to catch him. The company knows that. And the company has decided it's acceptable, which sounds like negligence right up until you understand what the counter is actually for. In nearly every large chain in this country, the person at that desk is understanding orders not to be a hero. No accusing, no chasing, no blocking the door, no hands on anybody, no clever interrogation. That isn't softness, and it isn't a corporate values poster. It's arithmetic. There is no quantity of stolen merchandise that costs what one broken wrist costs, and there is no console on earth worth an employee getting hurt in a parking lot over. There's a second reason, and it's the one people find harder to accept. The person who looks like a thief usually isn't one. He's a guy in an old coat having a rough week. Suspicion at a retail counter has an accuracy rate that would embarrass a coin flip, and a wrong accusation is a specific, expensive category of mistake that arrives with attorneys attached to it. So how does anybody get caught? Not the way television has taught us. Loss prevention at that size is not a man in a back room watching a monitor and running out swinging. It's data, assembled after the fact. Returns that cluster in ways ordinary life doesn't produce. The same identifier turning up across 3 stores in 5 days. One store sees a weird afternoon. A chain with thousands of stores sees a route, which reframes the console entirely. That refund was not a failure. Sometimes a suspect return gets approved deliberately because one refund is cheap and a completed documented pattern is the thing that actually ends the behavior. A confrontation stops one transaction and creates a scene. A file stops a person's entire operation and creates a case. The counter is not a gate. It's a sensor. It is built to let things through and write down what went past, and the person standing at it is holding a keyboard, not a shield. All of which works fine when the item on that counter was actually sold by that store. The trouble starts when it wasn't. Nothing about the blender on that counter was fake, stolen, or in any way suspicious. It also had never once been inside that building. The woman had her order pulled up on her phone. Ordered through the app, delivered to her house, wrong color and a lid that didn't seat right. She did everything a reasonable adult does. The associate scanned it and the item number came back as nothing. Not expired, not flagged. Nothing. That store had no relationship with that blender. She'd bought it on Walmart.com from a third-party seller several states away. Marketplace items run on their own 30-day clock, and the seller controls how the return actually works. So what she was holding wasn't a return at all. It was a request to a company she had never heard of, brokered by a website, being made in a store that had no part in any of it. And here's why I don't blame her even slightly. In her head there is one Walmart. One app, one logo, one truck, one name on the receipt. Nobody told her at checkout that she was renting a stranger's shelf space inside a store she trusts. She thought she was buying from Walmart because the entire experience was designed to feel exactly like that. And now an associate 4 months into the job has 90 seconds to explain modern retail architecture to her while the line grows. A week earlier, a man brought in a toaster from an entirely different chain. No receipt, no bag, complete sincerity. The same brand sits on Walmart's shelf, so to him it was the same toaster and this was the same errand. He was closer to a real point than he knew, and it's the thing I want you to hold on to. Without a receipt, the system cannot confirm that you bought an item at that store. All it can confirm is that the store sells that item number. Those are two enormously different statements, and the entire no receipt lane lives in the gap between them. That gap is why that lane ends with a driver's license on the counter and a gift card in your hand instead of a conversation. You would expect that gap to be the place where a company tightens every screw it owns. Instead, for an entire class of merchandise, it went the other direction and stopped asking for the item back at all. By now, the shape of this is probably obvious, but the form it takes online is stranger than the guess. You start a return in the app. The screen tells you to keep the item. The refund lands anyway. People screenshot this and post it like they found a crack in reality, and the comments fill up with strangers insisting it must be a mistake. It isn't. It's a written rule with fields in it. Sellers on Walmart's marketplace can set what the company calls keep it rules, and the setup is about as romantic as a tax form. Pick a department, set a maximum item price, set a maximum order total. Walmart's own instructions to its sellers say the reason out loud in plain language, without embarrassment. Sometimes it's more cost-effective to let the customer keep the item and refund them than to pay a return shipping fee. Sit with that. Somebody typed a number into a box. That number is the exact price at which you stop being worth arguing with. It isn't an insult, and it isn't a kindness. It's freight. A parcel crossing the country in the wrong direction has to be received, inspected, graded, repackaged, and put back into inventory. Every one of those steps costs real money, and for anything light and cheap and made by the million, the sum of them exceeds the thing inside. Earlier in this video, the price of a no was measured in minutes at a counter. Out here, it's measured in shipping, and shipping is a harder opponent because shipping doesn't soften up when you're polite to it. Then there's the detail that makes the whole thing beautifully absurd, and it's in Walmart's own seller guide. If a customer carries a Walmart-fulfilled item into a store without starting the return online first, the keep it rule doesn't apply. Same person, same item, same Tuesday. Handle it on your phone in your kitchen and a company tells you to keep a thing and sends your money back. Carry it through the automatic doors instead, and you're standing under fluorescent lights with a line behind you, explaining yourself to a 19-year-old. 2 doors, 2 completely different realities, and no sign anywhere telling you which door is which. And if the customer turns down the offer and insists on sending it back, the same guide says Walmart has sole discretion over how the item is disposed of, which is a very tidy corporate way of saying that thing may never re-enter the world at all. I'd like people to argue about this one, because I go back and forth myself. Being told to keep something feels like winning. It's also a company informing you politely that your purchase was never worth handling a second time. So the machine will pay you to go away. It will let a box of aquarium gravel walk out the front door. It will take back a Christmas tree in the middle of January. There are a handful of places in that same building where none of it works, and they explain everything that came before. Walk 40 feet from that service desk to the pharmacy counter, and the entire logic of this video falls apart. At the pharmacy counter, a woman set down a prescription she'd picked up that morning. Sealed bottle, untouched, full count, and a genuinely sympathetic story about a dog that turned out not to need it. She wasn't asking for anything unreasonable by the standards of the rest of the store. She was standing a short walk from a counter that had just taken back a used trampoline. The answer was no. It will always be no. There is no manager in that chain, in that region, or in that company with the authority to change it. Once medication leaves the pharmacy, it cannot go back into stock, because nobody can verify what happened to that bottle between the counter and the car. That isn't a Walmart rule. That's pharmacy law, and the pharmacist enforcing it has a license on the line that a store manager's opinion cannot protect. A man with an untouched case of beer for a party that got canceled. Depending on which state he's standing in, that store may be flatly prohibited from taking it back, because alcohol rules are written state by state, and a liquor license is worth more than every case of beer in the cooler combined. Somebody wants a gift card turned back into cash. Also no, and the reason is the simplest one in this entire video. A gift card that converts back into cash defeats the only job a gift card has, which is keeping the money inside the company that issued it. Every retailer in the country draws that line, and not one of them apologizes for it. Now look at what those three have in common, because it's the whole point. In none of them is the store the one deciding. A pharmacy board decides. A state legislature decides. A fraud model built before anybody in that building was hired decides. The no holds because it belongs to somebody with more authority in the room than the customer's mood. Everywhere else in that store, a no belongs to an hourly employee with a name tag. And a no that belongs to a person has to be personally defended out loud to an unhappy stranger in front of an audience by somebody who will still be standing there for 6 more hours. Back at the start of all this, there's a woman pulling a strand of silver tinsel out of a plastic branch. She had maybe a second and a half. The register had already handled everything it was capable of handling, which was the calendar and the dollar amount, and both of those came back clean because the holiday window is real and December is inside it. Everything the register could not see, which is to say everything that made the moment absurd, landed on her. She said yes. And measured by every standard that company actually uses to evaluate her work, she was right to say yes. Not one return in this video was a hole in the rules. Every single one of them was the rules, working. The tree, the dog food, the console packed with somebody's old console, the blender from a seller in another state, the refund that came with permission to keep the item. Yes is the cheapest path through that building, on purpose, by design, and the design isn't stupid. It's ruthless in one very specific direction. It took a cost that used to sit on a balance sheet and moved it onto a schedule. I'll say the unpopular half out loud. I don't think most of these customers are villains. The woman with the tree is not a criminal. She's a person who has been told yes by that machine a few hundred times across a decade and has drawn the only sane conclusion available, which is that asking costs nothing. That isn't a character defect. That's learning. The machine taught her patiently, one transaction at a time, and then acted surprised. But the cost never evaporated. Nothing evaporates. It got absorbed in minutes, in metrics, in a line that keeps getting longer, and in the very specific labor of keeping your face pleasant while a stranger explains that his used Christmas tree is now your afternoon. So here's the one thing at that counter that's actually free. The person facing you is not the decision. She is the last human being standing at the end of a long chain of decisions made by people you will never meet in a building in Arkansas, years before you walked in. Treating her like she wrote the policy costs you nothing at all. It costs her the rest of the shift. The tree went to the back on a flatbed cart. That tinsel is probably still in somebody's carpet. And the policy that made the whole thing routine is still on the wall behind the desk, where it has been the entire time, in a font nobody has ever read. None of it was a hole in the policy. Yes is the cheapest path through that building, and the bill lands on the person in the vest. So give me your verdict on the tree woman. Was she working the system, or did she use a policy the company wrote and published on purpose? Guilty or not guilty, put it in the comments. Like the video and subscribe, and I will keep taking these apart.